Albert Camus' The Stranger is a classic of world literature, and he won a Nobel Prize for his body of work. This I actually read really recently, surprisingly. My friend in high school that was reading heavy things, who recommended Candide back in high school, he was reading like Camus and like Sartre. But I found those existentialist writers kind of intimidating, and titles like Nausea and like The Plague didn't really didn't sound like so cheerful. But as I get older, I realize, well, I can handle those, and life is a little kind of gloomier than even teenage angst appeared to be, So there was one important thing that I learned from this book, besides just the actual points of it. The thing that I learned was that it's important for a writer to write about something, an idea, and it's extremely effective when a writer writes about an idea and cloaks it through literature. And this is like maybe the best example that I've experienced so far. Dostoevsky's good at that, with Brothers Karamazov, and other books like that where he tackles ideas. But this is like so great, and the language is really wonderfully simple. It's a straightforward story. So Camus, he's a famous French novelist and philosopher. He wrote several papers, and he was a pretty cool guy. He was kind of like the Humphrey Bogart of literature, French literature, cool, cigarette hanging from his lip, that kind of deal. But I tell you what, man, he walked the walk, because he could write, and he could express ideas in a really effective way. So first line, Maman died today, or yesterday maybe, I don't know. I got a telegram from the home. Mother deceased, funeral tomorrow, faithfully yours. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. So the story is about our main character, and let's see what it says in the back. Blah, 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 first published, okay. All right, it just talks about like how great it is. So our main character, his mom dies. He doesn't really have many connections. He's a simple guy, and so after that he sees his girlfriend. They swim. He smokes a lot because he's French, and it's like the 40s or the 30s, and it's all takes place in Algiers, and which I guess was a French colony. So yeah, he sees his girlfriend. They swim. They make love, kind of on the same day when he hears this news. And he's just enjoying the sun, and his neighbor has a quarrel with his girlfriend. There's like a neighbor also that like beats his dog viciously, and eventually the dog runs away. So all these things add up during the course of the story. And his neighbor gets into, I think like he gets into an altercation. I think it's because of his girlfriend, that these Algerian guys are after him, and they have a bit of a confrontation. They fight. Somebody pulls a knife, and then it just kind of disperses. But his friend has a gun, and somehow our character takes the gun, and he takes a walk to the beach, and he sees one of the Algerian guys, just kind of like laid out, maybe 25 feet away or so, and he's on the beach, like near the water, and then the Algerian guy at one point raises his hand, empty hand. Actually no, I think he raises his hand with with the knife, and he points the knife kind of in a threatening manner towards our protagonist, if you can call him that, and then there's like this beautiful moment where the light reflects. I don't recall what page it's on. Yeah, so here it is. And this time, without getting up, the Arab drew his knife and held it up to me in the sun. The light shot off the steel, and it was like a long flashing blade cutting at my forehead. At the same instant, the sweat in my eyebrows dripping down over my eyelids all at once and covered them with a warm, thick film. My eyes were blinded behind the curtain of tears and salt. All I could feel were the symbols of sunlight crashing on my forehead, and distinctively the dazzling spear flying up from the knife in front of me. The scorching blade slashed at my eyelashes and stabbed at my stinging eyes. That's when everything began to reel. The sea carried up a thick, fiery breath. It seemed to me as if the sky split open from one end to the other to rain down fire. My whole being tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. I felt the smooth underside of the butt, and there, in that noise, sharp and deafening at the same time, is where it all started. So, so he shoots this Arab in cold blood, essentially, and I believe he walks up and shoots him again closer, or he shoots him twice, and he can't answer later on when he's like questioned, but he's taken into the police, and and he's got an option when he's on trial. His lawyer, even beforehand, tries to prep him. He's got an option to say that it was self-defense, because there was an altercation earlier, and he can say, it's self-defense, and the Arab, even though it's colonized, the Arabs weren't really that favored, so he could get off because he's like a Frenchman, and so he could get off easily if he just simply says that it was self-defense. But he chooses to be honest, which is an interesting choice because he describes exactly what I read to you, which is that the sun was in his eyes, and he pulled the trigger, and he doesn't really know what compelled him to do so. So yeah, and then the whole proceeding becomes about what kind of character he is, what kind of character he is that his mom dies and he makes love with his girlfriend who also proposes to him, and then he's seeing his neighbors. He writes this fake declaration for his friend. So he essentially writes this like a lie regarding something about the guy's girlfriend, that he like witnessed this or that, to help the guy get off from getting caught beating his girlfriend. So he helps this bad guy basically. So all his actions leading up to this murder are questioned, and by the end of the whole thing, the court decide that this guy is so immoral, such an antichrist. At one point they call him jokingly, that he deserves like the full weight of the law, and he deserves to be executed. And the amazing thing to me was, there's so many things going on, and the amazing thing to me was that I felt like there was like, I liked the honesty. The way it's written is like beautiful. It's like this very matter of fact. It's like a dream, the whole thing. Even at the end, in the climax, where he gets emotional and he gives this big speech, which is kind of, well, the big climax of the whole thing. It's an existential speech. Even through the speech, it's kind of like a dream, like it's like a tearful dream. And essentially he's aware about death. It's like existentialism. You have one life, and he's the one that's addressing the elephant in the room, is like that we're all gonna die. And if there isn't an afterlife, what's the difference if I end somebody's life earlier, and my life ends earlier? Like, we're all going to the same goal. And isn't it ironic that my mom, before her death, she was like engaged, she had a fiance, like how, what lofty dreams to think that you could still, like live like normal with death like creeping in on you. And then that moment of the shininess of the life, it's almost like, one of the things that noticeable is the character appreciates everything but people in this world. Like there's so much emphasis about the sunshine, the water, the smells, the heat, the smoking, like the enjoyment of puffing on a cigarette, all those things. But he's disconnected from people. And there, certainly he is a bit of a sociopath if you can disconnect from people to like certainly murder somebody, but it brings into question ethics, like if everything is like meaningless and there is no God and everything is a fabrication, what does life matter, and what do one's actions really amount to? But then he has a moment at the end in this big monologue where he struggles against that, against life ending, and he kind of gets nostalgic about it. And so I'll read it for you here. Then, I don't know why, but something inside me snapped. I started yelling at the top of my lungs, and I insulted him, and I told him not to waste his prayers on me. I grabbed him by the collar of his cassock. I was pouring out on him everything that was in my heart, cries of anger and cries of joy. He seemed so certain about everything, didn't he? And yet, none of his certainties was worth one hair of a woman's head. He wasn't even sure he was alive, because he was living like a dead man. Whereas it looked as if I was the one who'd come up empty-handed. But I was sure about me, about everything, surer than he could ever be, sure of my life and sure of the death that I had waiting for me. Yes, that was all I had. But at least I had as much of a hold on it as it had on me. I had been right. I was still right. I was always right. I had lived my life one way, and I could just as well have lived it another. I had done this, and I hadn't done that. I hadn't done this thing, but I had done another. And so, it was as if I had waited all this time for this moment and for the first light of this dawn to be vindicated. Nothing mattered, and I knew why. So did he. Throughout the whole absurd life I'd lived, a dark wind had been rising toward me from somewhere deep in my future, across years that were still to come. And as it passed, this wind leveled whatever was offered to me at the time in years no more real than the ones I was living. What did other people's deaths or a mother's love matter to me? What did his God or the lives people chose or the fate they think they elect matter to me when we're all elected by the same fate? Me and the billions of privileged people like him who also call themselves my brothers? Couldn't he see? Couldn't he see that? Everybody was privileged. There were only privileged people. The others would all be condemned one day, and he would be condemned too. What would it matter if he were accused of murder and then executed because he didn't cry at his mother's funeral? Salamano's dog was worth just as much as his wife. The little robot woman was just as guilty as the Parisian woman Masson married, or as Marie, who had wanted me to marry her. What did it matter that Raymond was as much my friend as Celeste, who was worth a lot more than him? What did it matter that Marie now offered her lips to a new Morcelon? Couldn't this condemned man see that from somewhere deep in my future, all the shouting had me gasping for air, but they were already tearing the chaplain from my grip and the guards were threatening me? He calmed them, though, and he looked at me for a moment without saying anything. His eyes were full of tears. Then he turned and disappeared. I felt that I had been happy, and that I was happy again. For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. So yeah, it's very powerful stuff. I mean, that's a very famous line at the end. You know, all I want is the spectators, the day of my execution, that they greet me with cries of hate. Yeah, this is a really powerful novel, beautifully written. You know, it had that kind of Hemingway-ish feel. It kind of felt a little bit more like The Old Man and the Sea, because it read almost like a fable, like a dream, you know, in a fog. But really beautiful nuances of like the smells and like the visuals. And that, I believe, was the point. That like this man loves life so much, and he's living in the moment, and he's also honest about like not understanding things, and society wants him to conform they want him to conform to just this fake dialogue, like tell us like it was self-defense, that we understand. It's like action reaction, tell us you're like a good person, tell us you actually cared about your mom, like like dying, but he's like, well, I don't know, I just didn't feel anything. But they're like asking him so many times, like, just lie to us, tell us that you're a good person and you have feelings and remorse for death, and like your society expects you to feel sad when somebody dies, but to him it was just like, it's just part of life, like she's gone, she lived and now she's gone, I'm gonna make love to my future fiance, and how trivially she moves on, on the lips of another guy, and she just moves on. Yeah, there's so much, I don't have the words for it because it's so brilliant. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. Highly, highly recommend. I know I'm going to read it again because it's like a very short book. I think, let's see how many, look, it's like 120 pages, So very quick read. You could read it in an afternoon, basically. And yeah, just absolute masterclass of how to write a book and write it about actually something, like who cares about characters doing this and that? This is about something. This is about ideas. And it was a huge revelation to me that I feel like as a writer, you shouldn't write anything if it's not about something substantial. And I actually read a quote recently from Alan Moore, who's a comic book writer. And I was reading a biography of him, and then when it got to the part about the Killing Joke, which was a Batman Joker story, because he's famous for, V for Vendetta and Watchmen, which were about ideas. One about fascism, the other about state of the world and power struggles. So, and influencing the world. Anyway, so when he came to the Killing Joke, he said, like, that's the one I pretty much like least as a story that I've written, because it's not about ideas. It's about like these fictional characters. And to him, it's like, what's the point? Yeah, it's a good story, but really, it's not about ideas. It doesn't have any substance underneath. And The Stranger by Albert Camus has an extreme amount of substance. So highly, highly recommended.